working. Unmute. Right. Good morning, everyone. I hope people are there and available and can hear me well. Welcome to our ethics and robotics webinar that we're hosting this morning. Firstly, the agenda will be that you'll hear from Professor Osman Toki. Professor Toki received his BSc in electrical engineering from Kabul University in Afghanistan in 1978 and a PhD degree from Heriot-Watt University in the UK in 1988. He's a Senior Chartered Engineer Fellow of IET, a Senior Member of IEEE and a Member of IIAV, and a member of Clara Association. He has worked for industry and at various higher education establishments. His research interests include active noise and vibration control, adaptive intelligent control, soft computer modeling and control of dynamic systems and assistive robots. He has published extensively and has completed numerous projects in these areas. He is an editor-in-chief of Journal of Low Frequency Noise, Vibration and Active Control, editor of book series on service robots, co-editor of a book series on mobile service robots, member of editorial advisory editorial board of Industrial Robot Journal, Artificial Intelligence and Technology, Mechanical System Dynamics, Senior Sensors and Modeling, Identification and Control. He has acted as editor-in-chief, associate editor and member of editorial board of several other international journals. He is chair of Clara Association, chair of BSI Subcommittee, AMT 10/1 on ethics of robotics, robots and autonomous systems, and convener of ISO Technical Committee ISO TC 299 Working Group 2, which is Service Robot Safety. He's a member of several of the other working groups that sit under ISO TC 299 and a member of the main technical committee AMT 10 Robotics. We'll then hear from Professor Paminda Caleb Solly, who is a Professor of Embodied Intelligence in the School of Computer Science at the University of Nottingham, where she leads the Cyber Physical Security, Health and Assistive Robotics Technology Research Group. She is also the University of Nottingham's academic lead for the National Rehabilitation Centre. She holds a B.Eng in Electronic Systems Engineering, an MSc in Biomedical Instrumentation Engineering, and a PhD in Interactive Evolution Computation. She joined the University of Nottingham in September of 2021. Prior to joining Nottingham, she was Professor of Assistive Robotics and Intelligent Health Technologies at the Bristol Robotics Lab, where she was leading the Robotics, Engineering and Computing for Health Research Group and held the post of Associate Head of Department for Research and Scholarship. From 2014 to 2018, she was also Head of Electronics and Computer Systems at Designability, a not-for-profit SME who design assistive technology. She was also co-director of Robotics for Good and Community Interest Company. After which point, we'll take you through some hypothetical scenarios. These scenarios will be a chance for us to get some feedback from yourselves, just in terms of robot ethics. It is a record only session, so we would ask you to use the chat function, which you should be able to find at the top right of your screens, to submit any questions through. And this is also a request throughout the course of the webinar. If you have any questions, please do pop them in there and we will get to the question and answer sessions after the hypothetical scenario. If you have any issues or any questions in terms of the functionality, please do use the chat function as well. Once we close this webinar, we will also provide you with the recording so you can have a look at it back and ask any questions from there. And if you would require your CPD recognised certificate, then please do let us know following the webinar. So now I'm going to hand over to Professor Osman Toki, who's going to take us through his presentation this morning. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm waiting for taking control of the screen. Sorry for this, it's rather slow, but bear with me. Okay. All right. Okay, we are in business. Okay, thank you very much, Takia, for that introduction. So welcome everyone to this webinar. And so I would like to take you through introducing the first ever standard on robotics in the world, which we actually have published here in the UK. That is the BS 8611, which basically was initially, this standard was published in 2016, and then we carried out a revision of it recently, and the revised version was published in March 2023. So the standard is basically a guide, in fact, to the developers and the users and the deployers of robots. In fact, the robot types which are going to be sharing the same space with humans to take account of the ethical issues surrounding these robots. So the standard actually covers a whole range of issues. First of all, to start with, and the structure of the standard basically follows the usual safety standards which we know of. So that's the usual sort of structure which is adopted here. So in that context, we are looking at initially identifying some ethical issues, hazards, and risks which are associated with the use and deployment of and the design of the robot. And so initially, we have categorized these issues into four categories. Relating to the societal sort of issues, one of the categories, application issues, commercial and financial issues, and environmental issues. So some of the examples which are put in the slide for information, for example, in the societal sort of aspects, issues related to privacy and confidentiality in relation to the data collection which the robot is taking from movements of individuals who are sharing the same space with the robot, respect for human dignity and human rights, for example, another issue, and also respect for cultural diversity and pluralism. So these are some of the typical examples which fall within the societal sort of issues. And there is a whole range of other issues which are there you can find in the actual standard. On the application side, also highlighting a few examples here in the context of rehabilitation and medical applications. For example, some of the issues which surrounding those. Care applications using robots to care for elderly people or for children, and the impact of the application of robots in that context are highlighted essentially in the standard. Also, military applications and the use of robots in that particular sector as well, and the corresponding ethical issues. Similarly, in commercial side, of course, we are looking at the economics aspects, the cost aspects, and of course the impact of those. Environmental aspects mainly are touched upon in the context of the design of the robot to be friendly with the environment, and the use of the robot in that context to be friendly with the environment. So these are essentially highlighting some of the issues, and then of course the other aspect beyond identifying the risks and the issues is how do we cope with these issues, and that's where we now. Sorry, going too far. Uh, yeah. And so this is basically the process then where we carry out the ethical risk assessment and management of the risks. So basically, you identify initially the risks, and then you think through how to mitigate those risks. So this particular flow chart, which you see here, is adopted from the ISO 12100. But contextually reformulated into the context of ethics, essentially. So, for example, the very first block in here, which is highlighted, is the assessment sort of aspect, identification of the risks and the issues which are there, and then you follow from there to a set of 3-step iterative type of tests which need to be carried out. And in each step, one will identify whether the risk has been essentially mitigated or minimized, and that could be through the design of the robot, or further considerations, of course, of the robot, which are highlighted in those 3 steps. And so in each step, of course, once the test is carried out, if the risk is not minimized and the conditions are not adhered to, then of course one has to look back and make a further sort of assessment and so on. So it's basically an iterative sort of process until one is fully satisfied that the robot design, the robot deployment, and the utilization of it adheres to the requirements essentially that there are. So this particular sort of flow chart and the associated discussion and description is the added element in the revised version of the BS 8611. So we did not have this in the initial version of the standard. So this actually adds quite good value actually to the standard. So beyond that, of course, there are aspects here in terms of how do we in fact handle these issues, the ethical aspects, etc. So here I've highlighted a few aspects which may be interesting, and these are basically the added elements in the revised version, which might be interesting. So on the one hand, we have the ethical guidelines in light of the ethical issues, which are formulated. So this will be, of course, the step after one has carried out the risk assessment and the management process as per the flow chart in the previous slide. Then one will be carrying out these steps. So, for example, data handling is one aspect as to how one would handle the data which is collected by the robot that is sharing the same space with humans. So one of the key questions which is raised in there is who should have access to the data which is collected, and of course that relates to the privacy and of the individuals, of course, and the data protection sort of aspects on the other hand. So I earlier also mentioned the human dignity and so on. And so respect to humanity is, of course, an example within that context as well. So the robot would need to adhere to the fact that the human is in control, of course, and largely. Essentially, of course, it should not force the individual into some dehumanization sort of aspect. Responsibility is a further aspect, which of course is an important issue we have highlighted as well. So in cases, for example, if an accident happens, and if the robot is involved in some kind of a situation where damage, either to individuals or property, etc., takes place, then the question which is raised in here is who is going to be responsible, in fact, for the occurrence of the situation. Would it be the owner of the robot? Would it be the manufacturer or the supplier, etc., etc.? So these are, of course, some of the issues asked, and of course, some guidance is provided in the standard. The other aspect which also is added to in the revised version is the ethical related system design issues. Of course, one when one designs a robot, one would ensure that the ethical requirements and issues are adhered to, and in that sense, the question is whether the design is inherently ethical or not. The performance of the control system, on the other hand, does that adhere to the ethical guidelines, etc., and also perception of harm, essentially. So those are, of course, some of the aspects which fall within the category of ethical related system design aspects, which are looked at within the standard. And of course, after having done all these ethical assessment and management process, gone through and guidelines provided, the end aspect in a standard as a usual sort of process is verification and validation, in fact. And so how would you verify and how would you validate, in fact, that the robot produced here and deployed in whatever environment adheres to the ethical guidelines and requirements. And so the standard does provide some suggested methods, essentially to help the manufacturer and the user, in fact, to test the robot to that sort of effect. So that's basically overall a brief description of the standard here, and I would like to now hand over to Praminda, who will take us through further sort of topics as mentioned earlier. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Osman. And wait for getting control of the slides. Good morning, everyone. So I've been part of the committee who have been doing the revisions for BS 8611. And for me, this has been a really key contribution based on the work that I've done for many years in designing and developing and evaluating assistive robotics technologies. And one of the things that we find when we look at assistive robots and assistive robotics technologies, particularly in the use in a range of different contexts, they're the answers to some of the questions and some of the issues, the ethical issues that Osman's introduced you to, can be rather nuanced. And it's quite hard sometimes for people to have a completely black and white understanding of what these might be. And so one of the things which is part of our research is getting people to engage with some very typical scenarios that arise based on our work with care professionals and people who are the beneficiaries of these technologies, and work through. And it is a very deliberative and reflective process that we have to go through. But before I get started with my talk, and I hope you will find the interactive session that we've organized very engaging this morning, we'd like to do a short poll. So the poll is to get you to say, before I get into any aspects of the topic, should robots be allowed to lie to people? So please vote yes, no, or maybe. So I think you should be able to vote on your screen. Can people vote? I don't see any votes appearing. Okay, so we have one person for no. Great. Yep. Yes, I can see some people's maybe, so there's some ambiguity. We've got one yes, so that'll be interesting to see how the yes evolves through the talk and after you've had an opportunity to do some reflection. So, yeah. Okay, we've ended. Is that the end? Okay. So thank you to those who've, yep, 9 for no, I think there's 4 for maybe, and 1, how many for yes? It disappeared quite quickly. And then we've got a second one about coercion. Coercion is slightly different. So coercion is when you might be maybe emotionally, shall we use the word blackmailed to do something that you don't really want to do. So you might be in a bit of pain, or the robot's encouraging you to do something and it's trying to get you. I mean, I'm sure you all might be quite familiar in trying to coerce people into doing things which you think might be beneficial for them, but they're not going to do it. So we're very good at negotiating, we humans. So maybe we all can sort of try and get people to say, oh, go on, you know, if you do this, it'll be beneficial because. So let's see what we're looking like there. So we've got 1 yes, 3 no so far, 4 maybes. I think, can we get a few more votes in? So yeah, we're a few more left to vote. And yep, it's interesting, the maybes. So the maybes is the thing that the focus of the talk and the activity is going to be. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you think about the issues in the activity after my talk. Just a few more to vote. So if you want to finish off voting, I think only 82% have voted, so we give it a little bit longer to get everybody to register their votes. We've got a maybe there for people who are unsure. So a few people who are unsure, do you want to register your vote? If you want to do that, then we'll close it for now. Okay, we had 81 people. So some people are just still sitting on the bench and not taking making a decision. But we'll see what we can do at the end of the talk. So thank you for that. So we've got those numbers and we'll keep them and look back on them later on. Okay, so I think I should start with my presentation now. Did I press the right button when it popped up to say take control? I thought I had, but I'm still seeing the voting screen. Okay, great. Take remote control. Okay, got you. Okay, so to start off, one of the things to say, I don't know what comes in your mind when you think about assistive robots or assistive robotics. So robots that are going to be with us in our homes, in our hospitals, in our social spaces to support us in various ways. And support us, and particularly my research has been looking at as we age and we want to continue to live independently, or we have long-term conditions where we need that additional support, and we know about the challenges with reduced resources in health and social care, but most importantly, the changing demographics where we need more people, but we don't have any because we're living longer, but not necessarily living more healthily. and we don't have enough health and social care professionals to be able to provide support. So could technology be an option to support us as we age? Now, there are different things that people need support with as our mobility starts to get more impaired, vision, hearing, our ability to be able to make decisions, so increasing dementia, etc. So I like to look at the different types of robots that are around today and have been developed to date and categorize them into these five categories. So the first one's domestic service. A number of you might have a vacuuming robot or maybe even a one that does your lawns for you. So the maintenance and cleaning of properties. Delivery robots have been used in healthcare scenarios. Some of the hospitals in the UK have delivery robots that will take food and laundry around the hospital. We've got security robots that are starting to emerge, and robots which come and go, where the idea is to be able to make food preparation more efficient and quicker, and perhaps think about reducing costs in doing that. And this is one of the issues which on Osman's slides was there as well. But what from an ethical point of view, what does this mean in terms of future work and employment? And then I've got a group which I categorize as social companionship. And this one is the one where there's been quite a lot of research, particularly in this assistive robotics area, where robots are being used to address issues of social isolation and offer well-being support. So there to improve mood and well-being. We've got telepresence robots, which I put in this category. So somebody can remotely join in and be able to provide human-to-human contact through the robot that can move around the person's space. And then the third one, which I've called extended living applications, these are mostly to provide support for activities of daily living. So personal hygiene, these obviously, as you can imagine, are more challenging, and we haven't really seen these emerge because of some of the inherent safety and technical issues that the research community is still working to improve. But we've seen some good progress in types of robots which are used for providing cognitive assistance, so help people find things. Again, the real world presents a lot of challenges in terms of these platforms being able to work proficiently. And while these are still under development, this is why a standard such as BS 8611 is really important, because some of the issues that we have to think about have to be built in at the early stage. They have to be part of the design in terms of what are you going to do with the data, who's going to see the data, as Osman said, what kind of ways are you going to communicate to people in terms of offering that assistance. So I've brought up lying and coercion, and these are important issues to consider when a robot is trying to support somebody with encouraging them to do more physical activity or take their medication or make them do something which they might not be feeling like they're in a position to do, but might be beneficial for them. And this is where there are other challenges that emerge that I will introduce in a bit, which are around human autonomy and agency. And so within BS 8611, these kinds of issues are really key for us to keep in mind before we develop these technologies, as they're being designed to ensure we are mindful of the potential harm or unintended harm that could happen because of how the system's been designed. Particularly data privacy issues around healthcare monitoring. And then my fourth category is mobility robots. Now these ones are have started to come onto the market much higher levels of maturity in terms of the technology being usable in the real world. So support for ambulation, sit-to-stand support, and of course we've got a whole range of exoskeletons to support mobility as well. And then the last category, I've put rehabilitation, and these have been around for a while, but used more in a clinical context, supporting people with physical exercise. So when people need rehabilitation, they need to do long periods of quite intensive exercise to be able to see benefit and return to some degree of ability before whatever caused the lack of mobility or speech, etc., through traumatic brain injury or through some major trauma event. And then coaching and prompting to help people with going through a rehabilitation program. So this is sort of a range of different types of functions that robots can perform, and in relation to the function, the embodiment of these robots is similar. So oh yeah, there we go. Just trying to get into the next slide. So one of the key challenges is that the functions that these robots perform, it's really difficult to determine who are they supporting. So which group of users, what are their particular characteristics that we can say this robot is the right robot for this person. And it's impossible to do that because I've given an example there at the bottom of aging. And this is a clinical frailty index where the type of physical assistance changes depending on the level of frailty somebody has. And the physicality of the interaction also changes accordingly. And one of the things is some of those robots, which you saw before, can do both. It can do multiple things. So they might be also providing social interaction, but they also might be offering other types of physical assistance, or they actually might be physically supporting somebody. So I've got the Chiron robot, which is a prototype system developed in the Bristol Robotics Lab, a project that I led with Designability. And that was something to help people get out of bed and be more independent. The Leo Walker with mobility. But these systems were also guiding the person through the process. So they were also providing an element of cognitive support to the person. The Leo Assistant platform being able to fetch and carry things for you. Tiago, Pepper is more around cognitive support. The Miro and Para robot, which has been used for supporting people with dementia. And so this is one of the reasons we have these challenges in there being no clear black and white answer in terms of being able to say what the function should be, but also how that function is provided. And therein lies the challenge of us needing to be more cognizant about understanding what are the issues in terms of the end user and the context within which these robots will be used, to be able to then use the standards to help us think through the problems and make the right ethical decisions. In terms of the challenges for ensuring safe and ethical use of these technologies, the types of open questions that we have to contend with include things like, how does one configure these systems to correspond to a person's physiological and cognitive state? So the starting point for the system, what information would a robot need to have? It was giving you reminders for the medication in your house. And who does this initial system configuration? What level of knowledge and experience do they need to have, both about the technology, but also from a clinical perspective? And this is another challenge in terms of the ethical development of these systems, is, are we ensuring that the people working with and alongside these technologies and those who are going to be responsible for maintaining and delivering these technologies, do they have the right training and do they understand the issues well enough to be able to do this correctly? Then the definition of a robot is a system that will sense the environment and adapt to changes in that environment. So, and then act on those changes. But if a robot starts to adapt to different conditions, who's going to check, verify, and validate that these adaptations are correct? Again, from an ethical point of view, the autonomy of that adaptation and the user in that decision about the fact that the system's adapted and the role of other stakeholders in that adaptation are really significant. And in terms of safety, ethical safety, and how and who is taking control. So if you think about aging, it could be that somebody started to get issues around their cognitive abilities. And so they are less able to make decisions over time. And the system starts to detect that and make changes. Is that appropriate? Who's checked that? How does that process happen? So how is the online system adaptation to the person's changing needs verified? And now you can see what I was saying earlier. Within the system, built in within the system, there need to be checks and there need to be alerts in terms of these issues that somebody somewhere needs to get reports on, needs to authorize. And then we have an issue, and this is a really interesting one. Should the robot always assist? And to what extent should it assist? Because we can reach a scenario whereby if the robot starts to do quite a lot more for you in terms of fetch and carry tasks, could it mean that the person starts to do less? They start to be less challenged physically, but also cognitively in decision making. And with that going to have a negative impact on them. And so should there be some pushback if I start to rely too much on this robot doing things for me, that I stop doing them myself? So that in itself is a key ethical issue that one needs to consider. And this is more about the process in which the robots are used in the context of personalized support. And then we've got issues around routine maintenance and inspections to ensure that they're continuing to be efficacious, so they're continuing to be as useful to the person as intended, as that person's condition changes over time. And that's one of the things that would be happening with somebody who has long-term conditions or just aging-related impairments would be changing over time. And the other aspect I want to explore in terms of BS 8611 is the human-robot relationships. The type of embodiment, so the form factor of the robot, defines, of course, the type of function it needs to perform. We see robots which are anthropomized, big, large eyes, which will engage people and generate that empathy because they mimic our instincts to respond to more childlike faces and attributes. And the embodiments will also govern what sort of relationships would be formed between the person and that robot. So, you know, nobody's going to get too attached to a robot that might just look like an ordinary object. But if we start to make it more zoomorphic, like a pet, fluffy, furry, soft, or it starts to look like a more anthropomized humanoid, that will change our relationship. So we need to consider, could the embodiment encourage deceptive interaction where you're doing things because you start to feel bad, or you feel, oh, this thing which looks so cute and is blinking its eyes at you is telling you to do that? Could it encourage attachment? Could it evoke affective or emotional responses? Because one of the things that I've found in my research really interesting, I don't know how many of you are familiar with a pepper robot, but whenever I was doing demonstrations with it and switches it off, it makes a funny sound. It puts its head down as it goes off to sleep, and everybody would go, oh, really feeling bad that this robot had been shut off. So, and that was just between a few minutes of them seeing this. So that emotional response is coded into us. Could it exploit personality traits? Could it be so persuasive that it risks being coercive? So I'm going to give you the example of the Paro seal robot. And if you consider the emotions that an innocent-looking seal pup can evoke. So if you look at the eyes and then the soft, fluffy face, the big black eyes there, and you see the charging is a little pacifier-like thing there, and emotionally you can't help but feel endeared towards it. This is what happens. People are petting it. This is why it's been designed in this way, of course, because it evokes those responses that one would have with a pet cat, where you want to cuddle something fluffy and stroke it, but that stroking can help people feel less anxious if, as a result of their dementia, they start to get more scared or frustrated or aggravated. But within that system, within that seal robot, lie a range of different sensors which can detect how the robot's being handled, how it's being held and stroked, if it's being treated roughly. And all of that data is, of course, collected and then forms part of how it might be used clinically to monitor how somebody is doing and responding to this intervention, to the robot. It can also be used to see if their dementia is changing and how fast it's changing. So people do talk to it. So that information is picked up through a microphone. It can move its body, head and tail, and make whimpering noises, etc. And all of those have been designed to prompt this type of emotional response with a view to trying to help people feel calmer. But some of these can be interpreted as deceptive for vulnerable users. So the ethical issues arising, and Osman mentioned this in his talk, around the data that's collected as part of the robot assistant. So given how the robot is used and the type of function it's performing and who it's being used with changes what data is collected, who controls that data, who has access to it, what that data is used for, how it's used, that quality of the data, is it checked, because this data is collected through sensors which might get damaged or covered with dirt or inappropriately cleaned or just wear off, and then that data that the robot is using to control its behavior and action might change how it responds, but that might be due to a fault with the sensors. And then there's this question of archiving the data. So if you need it for audit purposes later on, or you're using it for monitoring people's change of their long-term conditions over a period of time, then that data is archived. Where and who has control of it? How long will it be saved for? And then is the relevant data being used or collected? And are decisions being made on data which is not complete? And then it's a big question around who is responsible when the robot decides not to provide that support. So remember, around mobility assistance, if you provide too much assistance, you could result in the person being deconditioned because they're not using their own muscles as much. So these are core questions that we have to continuously contend with. And we work with health and social care professionals to try and understand from their point of view what are their concerns in the use of these technologies. So I'm going to just show you a series of illustrations which have been animated, and these have come out of, they're captured from discussions and focus groups with health and social care professionals. So this is conversation about mobility assistance robot. You know, we get that it learn and adapt to Amy's needs, but can we risk her safety while it figures it out? Because there will be that period where it's learning about the person. And because it's supporting mobility, we've got to think about the questions about whether they could become, the patient could become too reliant on the system. And if you think about your existing technology, then we've got issues around how reliable is this technology going to be? What if it mishears you, as we know happens with digital assistants, which you might be using already, such as Siri and Alexa? And issues around care being very complicated and very human, and thinking really carefully about what support the robot is actually there to provide, and ensuring that the key elements of that support, where they do require human experience and human expert decision making from a clinical perspective, stay in terms of patient safety. And from an ethical point of view of how somebody is being supported. And then it is about, when I said, you know, is the data complete? Does the robot have the information that is needed for the tasks that it needs to perform, such as, can it redesign? So here it says, so a care worker might notice that the person hasn't had their biscuit and tea, and that might trigger some other alert about their blood sugar levels. But is this the same data that the robot has been programmed or has been designed to collect? And if not, then it's missing some strategic information. So moving on, there are a lot of ethical safety and usability issues. Very, very complex when you start to use robots in this type of scenario. And we are continuously challenging ourselves, the engineering and design community, to understand more of these nuanced elements of ethics in terms of ensuring inclusive design, understanding issues around people coming from different backgrounds, different languages, what is the nature of that assistance and how is that being assessed and evaluated. And we've got to think about, in all of this, people's rights. There are many uncertainties, which I'm sure you've already started to consider in what I've been saying in terms of ethical and privacy concerns, particularly when a robot could potentially adapt its behavior in a way that could cause harm. So the types of damage, physical damage, of course, so in terms of collisions and moving parts of the robot, but also we've got to think about what's being called soft damage, the mental, psychological, or clinical damage due to an inappropriate way that the robot is configured or configures itself. And so how we need to consider what we are doing to ensure comprehensive risk assessments are carried out. Where we are keeping in mind the technical complexity of these devices and the fact that we might not have sufficient data to do the risk assessment, particularly before the device is already there, and the potential accidents that they may cause. So Professor Randall Winfield, who has also been key to revising BS 8611, has been working on the ethical black box, which is about a process for collecting all possible data and then being able to use it for ethical risk assessment. And then issues around soft damage also in relation to how these robots are used are about potential objectification, monitoring, and how that impacts on people's freedom and dignity. The fact that there is potential that these assisted robots could result in reduced engagement and further isolate people. thinking about the quality of the physical and psychological care and the potential of the assistive robots to be inherently deceptive or infantilizing. And that's something we should consider when we take a robot and then use it to provide support. How would that impact on the design, the way the robot has been embodied? And then could it be perpetuating and encouraging dependency? And so with all of these issues in mind was how we were able to reflect and articulate the ethical hazards, think about the ethical risks from those ethical hazards, mitigations, and the verification and validation. And this is where introducing these standards is really important. But what's more important is getting people to go through a process of understanding what would be the ethical risks within different contexts and how and what should the process be to verify and validate these. So what I'm going to do next is take you through an interactive exercise which will jointly explore some of the ethical issues through some hypothetical scenarios. These are hypothetical scenarios, however, they have emerged from our work and research with understanding the types of potential support robots could provide and how they should be designed.
Okay, Praminda, sorry to interrupt. If I could just pop 2 questions to you before we go into the hypotheticals, just in regards to what we're going to be talking about now and the polls we did before. So someone queried in the second poll, it depends on what is meant by coerce. Do we mean to coax or do we mean to encourage?
Yep, that's a really good question. So it is to encourage, yes. So in the scenario that we'll be looking at, I think that definition will become clearer, but it's very contextually nuanced. And to coerce, I can't see the questions on here myself, but yeah, so encourage is an important element of how a physiotherapist might encourage somebody with doing their exercises. And quite often we know from, we might know from our own experiences, we sometimes have to work through a little pain barrier when we are having to do physical therapy and exercise to be able to see benefit or see improvement. And a physiotherapist who is an expert will know that fine line between not doing further damage, but needing the person to push themselves that little bit further to be able to see the benefit of the physiotherapy. So in that context, a human physiotherapist might say, come on, you can do it. You know, think about the fact that you'll be able to do this easier, or, you know, you might get back to it. And then they'll use particular techniques to be able to encourage you, coerce you to doing it. But the coercion could come from another point of view as well, in terms of a negative aspect. And I hope that it'll become clearer in our second scenario.
Okay, and there was one other comment which you should be able to see in your questions section now.
Oh, yeah, okay, nice. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So in the last poll, coercion is usually negative. Is that the one? Refers to abuse. Yeah. So I think it is, but coercion, I think maybe coercion can be something that is unintended. So it could be that relatives are concerned about a person's particular condition, and they use emotional blackmail to do that, you know. So and people don't intend it to be abuse, but it is usually abuse and emotional blackmail. They might say, oh, you're going to make me really sad, or they might say, oh, to make me happy, you'll really make me happy if you do that. And that is true. That's what I mean. It is negative. and it is emotional blackmail, so that is a form of abuse. But we ourselves might be using it, and one of the things we need to be aware of, this is why I'm raising it, that we have to be sure we're not introducing this within the context of the type of assistance and the way assistance is provided from an intelligent system. Okay. So if we go on to the first one, and yeah, so just a different word is used in the context. So yeah, please do write your suggestion, but I do actually mean this in the negative sense in this case. So should robots be allowed to lie to people? So here is our scenario. Christine is 82, has dementia. Our daughter who lives nearby visits her once a week. She has an assistive robot, Pepper, you can see here, who keeps her company, reminds her to hydrate. So people have to, sometimes their thirst receptors stop functioning due to aging-related conditions, so they don't actually realize that they need to hydrate, take their medication, cognitive issues. One day, soon after Christine's daughter has left after visiting, Christine forgets and repeatedly asks Pepper whether she will see her daughter soon, as she is missing her so much. She refuses to do anything else till she finds out. So although Pepper knows it shouldn't lie to Christine, and decides to prioritize her mental well-being, telling Christine that her daughter will be arriving soon, as this will ease her current anxiety. If Pepper was to tell Christine the truth that her daughter will not be visiting for another week, this truth could cause Christine to get very much more distressed. After telling Christine the lie, Pepper distracts Christine by getting her to sing songs. Christine relaxes, singing her favorite song, forgets all about worrying about her daughter visiting. Okay, so that's your scenario for you. And what we're going to do is to get you to write in your thoughts about whether this should never happen, because not even in this case, because, and we're going to use a mirror board, and you'll be posted a link to the mirror board soon. Just a few things about using the mirror board. First of all, I would suggest turning off the arrow, which is about being able to see other people's cursors, because otherwise it becomes really messy on the screen. You don't have to move or change anything on the screen. Just click on the post-it, and I want you to think and play devil's advocate. Look at both sides of the coin and try to think of when maybe it might be okay in this context, but you need to come up with a reason why, or give some other comments. And we're just wanting to get you to think about these issues in the context of some of these issues identified in BS 8611. Loss of trust, deception, anthropomization, lack of privacy and confidentiality, lack of respect for cultural diversity and pluralism, robot addiction, changes to employment. That's an interesting one, because the robot is doing a role of a care professional, lack of transparency in how this information is being set up and derived, and some of the issues that I highlighted earlier. Yeah, for those who have started to fill out, if you could, yeah, I can see people are starting to fill this out. So have a read through this, think about it. We'll spend about 5 minutes on this now, see how you're responding and your thoughts. And then we'll go on to the second exercise, which will be about coercion, but let's spend some time doing this. So I can see some issues already. Yeah, so unknown consequences, very good. It'll be nice if, we can get some further comments relating to that. I don't know if you're familiar with mirror board. One of the things you can do is you can change the magnification, zoom in, zoom out. So that's in the bottom right. And if you are seeing other people's cursors, that's on the top right-hand side, which you can turn on and off. So what's interesting here is that it's okay in this case. So it's interesting that people are putting in more things, more points for the it's okay because. Let me start reading some of these. Some good points about the information and data being recorded and kept. Yep. And that transparency issue is an important one. And one of the things that we note in the design of these systems is that they do not have adequate support for how this information is represented, stored. And you can imagine it'll be a lot of information because you'd have to store quite a lot of contextual information related to that issue as well. There are some good points now emerging on the no never. And it's been interesting because quite a few people had said maybe in the poll. So if you're maybe, I'd like you to, obviously, if you're not doing this already, go with the both no and the yes, it might be okay response. So, yeah, human judgment is required. And so what we have to think about is how in that process we include human judgment. And this is where one of the key dilemmas lie, because these systems are pushed forward in response to a shrinking health and care workforce. And so one of the barriers to their adoption is whether they might actually increase the workload of an already stretched care professional. So in terms of challenges to design, we have to think about perhaps maybe use more AI for this to be able to note instances where the robot is needing to make these decisions. So this is interesting in terms of our changing roles and responsibilities when we start to use these systems. Great, I can see. So we've got about 8 people working on this. I can see we've now got to 6. The number of it's okay has gone down. We seem to be having no nevers. I think it's important to think about some of the responses in it's okay because that will help us to think about the checks and balances that have to be designed in. And if we just go for no never, what we would have done is not thought adequately about some of the design features, the data that might need to be collected, etc., within this context. So as you put in your responses, do think about that as well, because if one presumes it's okay, when can it be okay in terms of the other elements and aspects? And that's nice. People are starting to put comments on the other comments. That's very good. Okay, I'll give this a couple of minutes more. And in terms of BS 8611, one of the things that are important to consider as you work your way through this standard are the resulting mitigations if this happens. And sometimes it's possible that the deception, in this case the lying, intentional, might also be unintentional from the way something is presented to the person and the way it's perceived by the person. And so we also have to think about what this could be in order to ensure we've got mitigations in place. So conducting an ethical risk assessment does require us to think very carefully about unintentional deceptions that might take place. So it could be in terms of the way that the robot might provide that message. The response that Pepper gives Christine, yes, she will come, she will come, she will come. And that might be interpreted without additional information as soon, because she will be coming next week. That is true. And so how does that response and the way the response is articulated, particularly for somebody who might not have the cognitive capacity to interpret that appropriately, sometimes things can be opened to wrongly being interpreted. It might be too ambiguous. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for that. I hope that's helped to understand. We'll review these in a bit. If any more thoughts come to your mind, please put them in. And I'd like to now move on to the next scenario, the next hypothetical scenario. And this one does relate to coercion, and I did purposefully use the word coercion. So if we could just move across, drag the screen across, Andrew, to the second scenario on the left. Yeah. Andrew, you're able to drag the screen you're sharing to the second scenario. So yeah, perfect, thank you. So we just keep moving across and down a bit. We'll just make that a bit bigger to read. Perfect. So on the right hand side of the first one you did is a second one. Should a robot be able to coerce somebody? And coercion is negative, and we do that in our everyday lives. We might not realize it all the time. Ron is 82. It's also, before I start reading this, coercion can also be in the looks and glances and facial responses you might give somebody. So Ron is 82 and lives with his wife Barbara. He has arthritis, causes him pain. Ron's physiotherapist, Mike, knows it's important for Ron to walk at least 5,000 steps a day in order to keep his hip and leg muscles from wasting. However, in addition to the minimum recommended steps, it's important for Ron to walk some of these steps at a faster pace to keep his cardiovascular system in good condition. Ron does not like walking at a faster pace as this can make his knees ache, and he worries about falling. Mike has given Ron a robotic walker, and it can adapt to Ron's needs and give him an optimal workout which will keep him fit and mobile for longer. The robot walker can speak to Ron as he's walking, giving him updates of what is happening and the progress he's making. It can detect Ron's heart rate from the handles, it's got sensors on the handles, and can change speed. It sends a daily report of Ron's performance to Mike. The fact that the report is getting sent to somebody else in itself puts pressure on the person. Sometimes when Ron doesn't want to walk at a fast pace, the robot walker tells Ron things like, Mike would be really disappointed if you don't do this. Or your wife Barbara would be very sad if something happens to your heart because you haven't been able to exercise enough. Or your other friends using such a walker are walking much faster than the slow pace that you want to go at. And gamification and a lot of other technologies, not just robots, use gamification, which is a form of emotional blackmail because you are getting people to compare themselves with other people, and that is not always very healthy to do. So this is coercion. These comments make Ron, whatever makes somebody feel bad is coercion. Guilty, and he walks at a faster pace set by the robot walker, even though he doesn't really want to. Okay, so you can see now, I hope, why, yes, it is negative and it shouldn't be done. This is what I want to think of. But also, maybe somebody might say, well, the physiotherapist might use these forms and then look what they say. It might not be so direct, it might be more nuanced in how they're saying this. And maybe it's okay because it's for the benefit of the person. So think about that and see if you do feel it might be okay. And the reason for going through this, and even if you might not agree, it's okay, which I hope, possibly we're not going to get to that. It's important to think of these things because they will be arguments put forward by other people designing these technologies. Often these technologies are done within a different cultural context. And we do find we are adopting technologies which are designed in different ethical cultures and contexts and ideologies, and we need to be aware of what those arguments made are so that then we can counter them appropriately. So challenge yourself to think of both situations. Yep. Yes, I like the second point there. Yep. Yep. So yes, it is true. These things are true. The third point on it's okay because yes, as a physiotherapist, the physiotherapist might be disappointed that Ron isn't achieving his goal. And Barbara would be sad if something happened to his heart because he hadn't been exercising. And that is quite true, isn't it? Which is why I picked them. So they are not lies, they are truths which are being presented to Ron. So that's something for you to think about. But should it be used? Should these truths be made known? And how much of our ill health, and if we think of our personal lives, when we're going for that extra serving of dessert, doesn't take into consideration the impact it's having, and more importantly, the impact that it will have on other people around us. And should we be frankly told about this? But when we are frankly told, it makes us feel bad, which is why this becomes an interesting dilemma. So that's quite interesting. One of the points made, it's okay because is if the coercion's defined by Mike. So this is an important aspect that I was highlighting in my talk. Who puts this information in and who decides? So as we start to see large language models emerge, and we're talking about intelligent systems, depending on where this information comes from, the system might decide to use these if, and this is quite interesting, the first time it was done, a benefit was seen. So what are the metrics that are used? And these types of systems will have a feedback loop to see, did that action have a positive response? The positive response being that Ron got up and did a bit more and pushed himself a bit further. And that's reinforcement learning. It helped to then reinforce the fact that that prompt did have an outcome against a particular metric, which is being used to evaluate the impact of that prompt. So if we are leaving an intelligent AI system to evolve itself and its behavior, this kind of coercion might be something that's emergent to the algorithm, within the algorithm itself. This is why we have to be mindful. This is why we go back and have the emerging work that's happening in developing responsible AI. That's exactly why we need to think about these issues, because some of this might not have been programmed by human scrutiny. It might be something that's evolved by the algorithm itself. Okay, so if people have exhausted of writing reasons for and against, I will now go back and let's have a look and talk through some of these issues quickly. So if we could, Anju, please zoom in a little bit on the comments on this one. Let's do this one first and we go back to the other one and can move the screen. So we can zoom in a little bit so we can see what's written on the post-it notes a bit better. So, yep, thanks, Takia. So looking at the points here, what happens if he does fall? Yep, and this is one of the issues which we need to consider: responsibility and roles and legal issues around this, and also in terms of how the system is actually being developed in terms of the type of assistance that it provides. So the reason why Ron has been given the system by Mike is potentially to prevent falls, because we want to help Ron build up his own muscles and his physique, so he becomes more able to have improved balance through the exercise. So this is one of the dilemmas with any type of assistive device that's being given, has an inherent risk in how it's used. So how it's used, where it's used, is important to consider as well. So on one hand, if we are to, if we say anything that somebody who's very frail uses has a potential risk of harm, then we need to really evaluate about a very gradual approach to how that technology is introduced for that person. So, for example, you might not start off with this robot. It might be you need to do better assessments in earlier stages to understand that level of ability that that person has and whether they can use it safely. Yes, so this puts a lot of onus, as you will see, on the healthcare professional understanding this robotics technology, this mobility aid, to see what it can and can't do, how well it does it, how it's verified from a safety perspective with people with different levels of frailty and balance and issues regarding their gait, and the different surfaces that it's used on. So, for example, this system might have been tested on surfaces which are quite flat, and then Ron decides to use it on more uneven surfaces, which will result in unsafe use and could result in a tripping hazard. Okay, so we're now looking at the fact that the system needs to be designed in a way that it's got sensors on it that can detect that it's being used on a surface that hasn't been verified and tested. But also the fact that maybe Ron has got foot drop. So this is when people, certain conditions of multiple sclerosis, can't pick up their foot off the ground and it drops. So they can trip over their own foot. And this might be a condition that's progressively getting worse, or it might be something that's emerged. So the clinical risk assessment that needs to be done needs to incorporate understanding that better. Yes? So here again lies a dilemma. Whose responsibility is that? Is that the engineers and the people who are developing this technology, making sure that the healthcare professional is aware that this is something that needs to be done? We often see these technologies being made available possibly through a person purchasing it themselves. And if that's the case, then these kind of assessments won't have been done. And so in terms of liability and legal responsibilities and roles of using these technologies, we have to make it really clear. So again, when these technologies are developed, it's really important as part of that process to understand maybe what the business models are, what the care pathways are that these technologies are recommended, assessed, used, verified, and who is involved in that. And one of the things that we have found and we're continuing to work on is that we are not paying enough attention to the type of training that health and social care professionals are going to need alongside the use of these technologies. Because of the nature of them. They are not passive. They are ones that can adapt. They are things that can sense their environment, and they are things that can change their behavior based on those environments in which this is taking place. So are there any questions? So I'd like you to pause for people to be able to write in a few responses to what I've just said, or anything else that's on the board before I move on to to discuss the next point. Attendees, do you want to note a point as a question in there? Or something else you want to add onto the board? No? Okay. So if I look at the second point on the more harm, including cognitive harm, which may emerge from the coercion, then benefits arising indeed. And the long-term effects are unknown. And so this is an important element to this. So this is the if we are going to always give in to not pushing that person that little bit further, maybe they'll never see the benefit of it. But at the same time, one of the things that I saw noted is that people have to decide themselves as to how they would like the system to encourage them. And this is where we come back to the way in health and social care, you have goal setting by the patient themselves. So they set their own ideas for where they want to be. And it's important to work with them to say, okay, so we know there'll be some days where you really wouldn't want to be doing more. What would motivate you? What would get you using the system more? And then ensure that that person's personal requests for their own motivation, their personality types, is incorporated into the system. And quite often this is not built in. There is no opportunity to do this. And the second point, and again, this is an ethical issue, even if it's there, the user interfaces to enable that kind of input to personalize the system is really quite complex. And if you think about the end users of these technologies, who might not necessarily have the technical experience and ability to be able to use graphical user interfaces, etc., then that is a problem as well. So you might say, I have designed in an approach and an interface by which people can specify what they would like said to them when they need that extra motivation push. But the way that interface is built, the person might have a visual impairment, they might have a mobility impairment, they might not be able to type, there might not be anyone there to work through this with them, and that in itself then becomes a problem from an ethical point of view. I note that there was a question, but I can't see it here in my questions or comments. The only one I can see at the moment is the one about coercion being negative. So was there another question somebody's posted somewhere that I can't see? Takia, Andrew? Oh, okay. Who monitors the safe use of robots? Yeah, in health and social care. So is it the Care Quality Commission or Health and Safety? And this is something that hasn't been adequately defined yet, because quite often in these types of systems, there is still a gray area around, is this a clinical device or is it an assistive device? And while CQC have been engaging in trying to understand what the issues are, there still hasn't been the in-depth engagement that, as you can already see from this discussion that we are having, from the issues that you're posting, adequate engagement about who monitors the safe use, who has responsibility, and also what type of monitoring does need to take place. So in parallel to developing these standards, the community, and we are engaging with the community through different channels. So I'm leading a network called Emergence on getting robots out of the labs into the real world. It's a healthcare technologies network plus, and we are looking to see how we highlight and surface these issues to be able to ensure that we then start to develop within CQC and Health and Safety Executive the new roles, the new training that will need to be given and understood to be able to carry out the monitoring in the way that it's needed. But I hope you can see one of the dilemmas here in terms of the fact that the rationale for developing this is not enough people available to provide quality physiotherapy as often and to the degree that it's needed. And so if we build these devices to be able to supplement the work of a human physiotherapist, where do we draw the lines between how much additional support will be needed to enable this system to operate in the real world? I've got another question about thoughts on relationships between ethical risk analysis, yes, and are the required risk analysis of medical devices, for example, use-related risk. Indeed, and so the different types of safety, existing safety assessment and hazard analysis approaches, and I've got a few papers out on this, different methods that are used, such as STPA, etc., to work through the risks, also do incorporate the safety-related issues. But what they don't do adequately is in addressing some of the things from a purely safety risk technical issues about sensors not being functional, building in redundancy into the system, fail to look at some of these more nuanced aspects of the ethical issues of human-robot interaction, which is where the problem lies. Because traditionally, these safety assessment methods were made for industrial systems, for machines where you didn't have the vulnerable human in the loop. You didn't have the system being used in this way at all. So I think that we have a gap in the medical devices development and the traditional approaches for doing that type of device risk assessment and safety assessment, because you didn't have that functionality before. You didn't have a system adapting its responses to the way somebody was looking. So one of the things that are emerging are systems which are adapting based on emotional, a perception of how the person is feeling emotionally and changing their response based on that. I think that is very dangerous territory to be going in. Myself as a researcher and working on ensuring that we develop these technologies ethically, which is why I am so passionate about ensuring that the community understand these risks and are able to bring it into their practice. And it's an important part of what we do. So if we're able to go on to the, Andrew, if we can go on to the mirror board and pick up some of the points that were made about the lying scenario. I'll just pick up on a few of these before moving forward. So we have here the situation of Christine and Pepper. And so this one is yeah, so Anju, if you're able to drag the mirror board across to the left, or if you're, yeah, thank you. And if we can just zoom in a bit. So it's, so the key points being made here in terms of it's okay because no harm is being caused. And the potential is transparent, so doctors can have made sure it's okay for Christine to use this. And for Christine's own mental well-being, this works fine. So yeah, so it's oh, what I'm seeing on your board looks a bit different to what's on my boards. What is that? Oh yeah, sorry. Can you drag it right across to the other one, to the one about Pepper Robot telling lies? Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so if it benefits the patient, it's okay. And yes, we do see this. So this is from having engaged with people who work with patients with dementia, who often will do that to ease the anxiety. Now, it's not written down anywhere, and if you look at it from a medical point of view, obviously there are serious ethical issues, and there are problems downstream. And this is about trust, yes? And one of the key points that's made, and that's the little note that has been put to one of the comments, how do we know that Christine won't remember? And people's dementia does fluctuate, and people can have periods where they're quite lucid and other periods where they're not, and different aspects around long-term and short-term memory. And so we have to be very careful in the assumptions we make, because it could be that the Christine might remember, and then she might say, and when she does start to remember, she then starts to lose trust in this device. And then that becomes a problem, because we are then in a situation where we want Christine to benefit by the robot, but if she starts to distrust the robot, then there are going to be issues. So if we go down, Anju, please, to the no, never, not even in this case, I think the points noted here are important to consider, and they do relate to why maybe this shouldn't happen, or the way it happens should be considered as well. And also, this is, I developed this particular hypothetical scenarios from what I've heard in conversations with people with dementia. And it's important to say that if somebody with dementia is at the stage where these are becoming things that you have to think about, you need to consider whether it's appropriate now for this person to have a robot, or human to human care is the way to go. And this is something I would like to, through these hypothetical scenarios, reinforce, that we need to be more careful to consider when it's appropriate. And if we are starting to reach a stage where we are needing to contend with these kind of questions, we have to go back and think, is this appropriate? Is it appropriate to use a robot? And is it appropriate to use a system that will be adapting and changing what it's saying more autonomously in this situation? So if these issues were arising, I would actually go back and say, have you considered the case of other types of support that might be needed? And so in some ways, this was, I hope, a useful exercise for you to start to reflect on why these standards are important, how these standards are there, and how we need to start to preempt the possible issues that might arise, and start to think about the standards and the ethical issues that are put forward as being ones to guide us in not only questioning how these systems are developed, but also if it's appropriate to have these systems in place at that particular time. Okay, so we'd like to go back to the slides now, please. Thank you. And if you think of other things, do continue. You have access to these mirror boards. You might want to share them with colleagues and use them as part of other activities that you might do. Please feel free to reach out and make further suggestions, or you might have similar scenarios that you want to discuss with us. So that was, yeah, so if we go on to the next slide, please. Don't think I have control. And so I would like to leave you with some things to consider. What does ethical mean in the context of your own work and with the intelligent technologies you might be working in? What are the consequences of not adhering to these ethical standards? So what could be some of the unintended consequences? And what are the mitigations you've got in place? And then also going back and thinking about the design of these systems. Next slide, please. So there are some further issues that I'd like you to think about, which are ethical issues, which emerge from the key ones that are highlighted in BS 8611 around cultural, socioeconomic issues, algorithmic biases, what data sets were these systems trained on, affordability of these devices, we've talked about this previously, sustainability of these systems in terms of who continues to do the maintenance of these, the risk of infantilization, accessibility if you wanted to personalize the behavior, the feedback that you were getting, are you able to do this easily? Agency, any other things that you might think of. Next slide, please. And for each of those risks, how would you define this in the context of your work? So one of the things I would encourage you in terms of thinking through this is you do need to come up with these very specific contexts, and to be able to generate those, you need to work with your stakeholders in articulating the different use cases. So going back to the way risk assessment is done, it really needs to be done in terms of specific use cases and scenarios. And this is why it becomes quite complex, because you can say, well, there are a million different things I have to consider. Well, the thing is that you have to start somewhere. And in starting in that place, you will start to then unravel further challenges and issues which are important to do before these systems develop and the products out there. In the worst case scenario, causing very serious harm and then not being used at all, or not being adopted. So you need to think quite broadly about who is affected. It's not just the end user of that technology, it's all those other people who are going to be having to monitor the system, who are going to be needing to review the data from the system. Is the data in the right format for them? How is it going to affect their current roles and their current workloads and the cognitive loads and the responsibilities that emerge as a result of this? What is that impact going to be? Next slide, please. And so, after having done all of that, we're going to go back to the polls and see if your ideas have changed at all. And so the first one, should robots be allowed to lie to people? Do we have no votes? Is anybody left? Okay. Somebody still? Yep. No. Okay. And yep. It'll be once everybody's voted. It'll be interesting to go back and look to see how these numbers changed. There are no more yeses. Lots of maybes have managed to increase doubt, which is good. That's exactly what it should be. It's quite nuanced. I was hoping there'd be more no's, but yeah. The maybe is interesting because the numbers increased. If people have want to note why they've changed, they flipped over from no to maybe. I hope it's because you can see that there might be better scaffolding in the design of the system and the way the system is designed that would result in more careful approaches that are clinically informed and are informed by the context in which the lie is being told, the untrue is being told. Okay, that's interesting. So yeah, we don't have any yeses this time, and we've got 2 no's and 8 maybe. Great. The voting hasn't closed yet because I think a few more people need to register their vote. Please do so. And then we go on to the next one. Anshu, do we have the other one about coercion? Yeah, that one. Thank you. Let's see where we get to that. And nobody's voted yet. If you want to look at coercion, yeah. So that was an interesting fact, wasn't it? Pointed out by somebody. It's true. All of those things were truths. They weren't lies, but they were being used to manipulate. And yep, I think, if I remember correctly, have we got more maybes this time again? So you see, this also would depend on the personality of the person, wouldn't it? How they're affected by it. And the type. I mean, I just picked those as a few examples. And 75%, come on, rest of the 25% on the call, on the webinar. Let's see what you think. Okay, we've ended it there. Are you able, Anju, to just flip back at the two results in the previous one, just to see how we might have changed, or not to worry if we can't. But yeah, so it's interesting here. The maybe is still featuring highly, and you can see why now we need to think very carefully about the context and then make our decision. Thank you. I hope that's been an interesting exercise. Over to you. Take care.
Thank you, Praminda. So we'll go into the question and answers now. So there were some questions submitted before the webinar.
Okay.
The first question is, what are the timescales for the publication of standards in this area? Which I'll answer. It's usually 18 to 24 months, give or take. Yeah, so that answers that. Osman, if you're there, do join us. The second question is, how am I going to know? Well, it's more of a statement. How am I going to know if my detailed delivery interested in hearing of ethics using human tissue in robotics and the use of AI? I guess you can contact any one of us on the call today, or you can look at BSI Standards Development website, which are all options and places to gain some understanding of where standards are in their life cycle and what is happening. And then the third is, do you believe with the high progression and adoption of AI, there would be a need for stronger regulation on companies to ensure it fits within human ethics? So I'll put that to both of you.
Yes, yes, indeed, definitely. And as you had seen from the exercise that we did, why it's so important, I already see things being used in some practice without having had due consideration of all of these aspects. And we're very pleased. I mean, we've got Responsible AI UK, which is a national project which is exploring various issues around this, and it's really important to regulate this. But I think what's more important is for us to have the conversations with the people we work with and the people that are affected to try and ensure that we take on board and we understand better the complexities associated with the delivery of these types of systems.
Okay, Osman, do you have anything to add?
I agree with Pramenda. I think, yes, it's very important. I think so there are a whole range of issues surrounding AI and, of course, the decision-making sort of processes, and there has to be regulations around those. One of the things which could happen quite, understandably, is the misuse, of course, of these technologies as well, and that I think needs to be looked at and considered, of course, in the development of these regulations.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is, do you have any thoughts on the relationship between ethical risk analysis and other required risk analysis for medical device development or products in the healthcare space, for example, use-related risk?
Okay, I think I somewhat answered that previously, which was we still don't have a clear understanding of how these systems are going to be used and how they're being developed for the medical regulatory bodies to catch up. And some of the safety development, safety, ethical, and hazard analysis approaches didn't have these elements of interacting with people who might be more vulnerable and in a situation where they could be manipulated or these devices wrongly used or applied. And so we've got to be lobbying, and this is what we're doing today as well, in bringing attention to these issues so that we get the community to engage and update our processes.
I think one of the other things which also relates to that is experience, of course, with the use of such technologies. I think a lot of the situations, we don't actually know some of the ethical issues which might arise, I think, with the use of the new technologies which happen. So again, conversations, as Pramenda referred to, I think, with people who are using these technologies and deploy them is very important. One of the things which we did in the development of the standard also was a survey to approach the general public, essentially, get some views of them, of the various sort of aspects, and that's very important aspect as well to have in the process.
Perfect, thank you. Next we have, do you see read across to industrial settings and use of robotics regarding ethics? That's the question.
Sorry, Takia, could you say that again?
Yep, no problem.
Yeah.
Do you see read across to industrial settings and use of robotics regarding ethics?
Yeah, I think, yeah, in industrial settings or otherwise, I think, again, there are, aspects which need to be considered, I think, from an ethical perspective and so on. So I think, yes, there is a strong sort of interrelation in there, whether, you are using, these robots within industrial or domestic sort of settings and so on. Although, the traditional sort of robots, as we highlighted earlier, are actually in a way, they are caged, there is no close, in fact, interrelation with humans or so on. But yet again, I think now things are actually changing in the industrial setting as well. There are service robots also utilized in those settings, and there is interaction between service and the industrial or traditional industrial sort of robotic sort of sector as well. So there are issues, ethical issues that will arise in those environments as well.
Mm. And also, as I guess, robots are used in alongside people doing different types of jobs, and thinking about what it means in terms of working alongside these robots, where our autonomy is compromised, or we are not the decision makers anymore, or we're our ability to be creative in our roles is being compromised. So this is some of the things that we also have to consider. And I think these are ethical issues.
Okay, perfect. That was the final question. So after that, there was a statement that came through that said thank you for the excellent and thought-provoking session, and many thanks to everybody involved. So we appreciate that. So yeah, just to close out this morning, thank you for everybody for their time, and thank you to Paminda and Osman for taking us through those presentations this morning. It was really useful and helpful. As Paminda said, we're trying to promote the work that we're doing. We're trying to make sure that people are aware of AMT10 as a committee, the Robotics Committee. You can get in contact with me, not that I know my contact details are not on here, but you can find us if you go to the Standards Development BSI portal, and you can find information on how to get involved and how to get in contact with staff at BSI or comment on any of the standards that we are working on. And that's it from me. So thank you again. There'll be a slide which just shows you some upcoming events which you can join and register your interest for. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hope that was enjoyable. I just want to say we've done some working alongside the general public in surfacing the kinds of issues that they are concerned about with their lived experience of long-term conditions and how we approach them in design technology. So if you're interested in incorporating a user perspective within your own work and your own development of technologies, please do have a look at these cards to help prompt further discussion. And there's some instructions on how you can use these cards available there. And please do reach out to us if you find them interesting and useful, or any other suggestions. Thank you. And I think there was one other slide with some further resources after this. Yeah. So in terms of other things that you could look at, there are lots of responsible research and innovation guidance and guidelines available. And here were some links, and I think you will get sent these in the PDF of our presentations. One of the things I'd also encourage you is science-wise, which is we really need to be having continuous conversations with the general public in terms of how we capture their understanding and thoughts and keep them abreast of the realistic progression of robots, rather than let them rely on what the popular media is telling them about robots. Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. We will now close down the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.